The British Empire is something we've touched on before. How it became so powerful, why it fell apart, and where its influence can be seen today. But there's one story about the empire that no one knew until recently, the story of the forgotten colony of Britain's very own East Africa. This is the first part of an exciting new series all about the British Empire. And to kick things off, we are going to be heading over to East Africa, where the British once created their own version of India. Before we get into it, though, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more videos about the British Empire. Now, let's get into it. The British Empire is often remembered as a vast and far-reaching colonial enterprise, spanning from the United Kingdom to far-off lands like India, Australia, and New Zealand. However, one aspect of the empire that is often overlooked is the British East African colonies. This region, which included parts of modern-day Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and South Africa, was a vital part of the British Empire, playing a significant role in the trade, economy, and politics of the time. The origins of British involvement in East Africa can be traced back to the 18th century, when European powers began exploring and conquering new territories. At this time, the region was inhabited by a variety of ethnic groups, including the Kikuyu, the Luo, and the Zulu. But these groups were not unified and were often at war with one another. The British, seeing an opportunity to expand their colonial holdings, decided to intervene. In 1886, Britain and Germany each established settlements along the east coast of Africa near the port cities of Mombasa and Zanzibar. While initially these colonies were primarily trading posts, over time the British began to exert greater control over the interior regions. This was partly due to the introduction of the railway, which allowed them to transport troops and goods more easily. It also didn't help that the Germans weren't exactly being nice to the locals. So the British began to take an interest in their neighboring colony. By the start of the First World War, German East Africa was a well-established colony with a strong focus on agriculture and mining. The Germans had introduced new crops, such as coffee and cotton, and had also exploited the region's natural resources, including its vast mineral wealth. However, the war would ultimately lead to the downfall of German East Africa. The British, along with their allies, invaded the colony in 1914, and after a brutal campaign. It was divided between British and Belgian control. Following the war, British colonial authorities implemented policies aimed at integrating East Africa more closely into the larger British Empire. They encouraged the growth of cash crop agriculture, particularly of coffee, tea, and cotton, which were in high demand in Britain and other parts of the empire. This economic integration made East Africa an important supplier of raw materials for British industries. Additionally, the British government invested in infrastructure projects such as roads, railways, and ports, further connecting the region to the rest of the empire and facilitating the transportation of goods. But the impact of British rule went beyond just economics. The British colonial administration also introduced new social and political structures to East Africa. They established a system of indirect rule, which aimed to maintain the existing social hierarchies and use local leaders to enforce colonial policies. This approach, while intended to make administration easier, often resulted in the marginalization of certain groups and the perpetuation of inequality. Furthermore, the British introduced Christianity to East Africa, which led to both positive and negative consequences. On one hand, it provided new opportunities for education and healthcare. On the other hand, it was often used as a tool to undermine traditional beliefs and practices. Despite these changes, the people of East Africa continued to resist British rule. From the early days of colonization, there were rebellions and uprisings against the British authorities. The Kikuyu, a major ethnic group in what is now Kenya, played a significant role in resisting colonial rule. Their efforts, however, were often met with brutal suppression by the British military. As the 20th century progressed, the desire for independence grew stronger. Leaders such as Jomo Kenyatta emerged, advocating for self-rule and an end to British control. After the Second World War, the British government began to recognize the shifting political landscape and started to make moves towards granting independence. In 1945, the British government announced plans to create a new colony called Kenya, which would be independent but still a part of the British Commonwealth. This process was met with mixed reactions. While some leaders, such as Kenyatta, were willing to work within the framework of independence within the Commonwealth, others, such as Dedan Kimathi, took up arms to fight for complete independence. The struggle for independence culminated in the Momo uprising in Kenya in the 1950s. This violent conflict between the Kikuyu people and the British colonial forces resulted in thousands of deaths and forced the British to re-evaluate their colonial policies. Eventually, in 1963, Kenya gained full independence, marking the end of British colonial rule in East Africa. But the legacy of colonialism continued to shape the region's political, economic, and social landscape long after independence. The British East African colonies may have been short-lived, but their impact was profound. The region's integration into the British Empire brought both opportunities and challenges. From economic growth to political marginalization. Ultimately, the story of British East Africa is a reminder of the complex and often contradictory nature of colonialism and its lasting impact on the world we live in today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our previous videos on the British Empire.